Welcome to another episode of Altitude Shift, the podcast where I explore how to build greater executive presence, trust, and influence at work. Frankly, the kind of skills that are unlikely to be delegated to ChatGPT anytime soon. I'm your host, Chris Verley. I'm an executive coach, and I've worked with many professionals who are struggling with imposter feelings, which is why I've decided to do a little mini-series on the topic. In fact, if there's one thing I've noticed in my coaching practice, it's that the higher people climb up the professional ladder, the more insecure they feel in their success. If you haven't already, I suggest you listen to my very first podcast episode titled Why You Feel Like a Fraud at Work and What to Do About It, where I make an attempt at explaining this weird phenomenon. In this episode, however, I'm going to focus on what to do when those imposter feelings present themselves in their most natural ground zero, the meeting room. Now, whether it's an actual conference room or a Zoom call, imposter feelings usually show up in the form of a thought, usually along the lines of, "Oh my god, I have no idea what I'm doing here, and someone's about to notice." This then triggers a stress response, which usually causes you to apply one of two strategies. Either you go quiet and disappear into the background, which tends to be my go-to, or you start talking too much by rattling and rambling. Both strategies will massively undermine your authority, so in this episode I want to show you how to handle those insecurities while you're talking to others. Now, just for context, there's a good reason why meetings trigger imposter feelings. That's because most of them present a cocktail of four powerful stress ingredients. First, there's visibility. You're being watched by others in the room. Second, there's judgment, because your performance is being evaluated by everyone in that meeting. Third, there's uncertainty, because you don't know where the meeting is going. And then lastly, there's always some kind of hierarchy in place, even when people pretend that there isn't. So from the brain's perspective, meetings don't just present an intellectual challenge, but they represent a full-blown social threat. Your status, your credibility, and your sense of belonging are all potentially at stake. And despite thousands of years of evolution, our brain treats this social threat very much like a physical danger by flooding your body with stress hormones. That's why imposter feelings often feel very physical, like a tightness in your throat, or shallow breathing, or a faster heartbeat, or going red-faced, or feeling a bit foggy in your head. Now, the mistake most of us make is that we treat those sensations as evidence that we're underqualified, that we're incompetent, that we somehow shouldn't be in this meeting. So that means that if imposter feelings are nothing more than a predictable nervous system response rather than a truthful assessment of your ability, the question is no longer how do I get rid of these feelings, because you can't, and it's more how do I stop these feelings from ruining my meeting. And that's where preparation really matters, because the best time to tackle imposter feelings in a meeting is before you even walk into the room. So here's my biggest tip of this episode. Don't wait until you're in the meeting to figure out how you're going to show up. What I mean by that is that you have to decide beforehand what your role is, what you want to contribute, and what you're going to do once you start to feel under pressure. Now, what that looks like in practice is actually very straightforward. Before the meeting, take 90 seconds or so to answer a few questions. The first question is, what's my role in this meeting? Not my job title, but my function. Am I here to make a decision, to advise, to spot risk, to challenge, to clarify, or to move the conversation forward? Pick one. If you don't decide this up front, your nervous system will choose for you in the moment, and as I said earlier, it will usually choose either silence or rambling. The second question is, what's the one thing I want to contribute in this meeting? What's one point I definitely want to make, or one question I want to ask? Then decide to make that point or ask that question as early in the conversation as possible, because getting it all out early, that reduces the internal chatter about whether you should speak at all. And maybe you decide beforehand that you don't need to say much at all, and that your role is just to take notes. But even then, you can still contribute something by summarizing the action points at the end, or by naming the decision that you think has just been made. Or likewise, if you're leading the meeting, at the very beginning, always frame why we're here, what outcomes we're working towards. The third thing to decide before you step into the meeting is, how are you going to show up once the spotlight is on you? Because as I said, under pressure, most people either go quiet or they over-explain. So instead of hoping for the best, set a simple rule beforehand. When I feel nervous or under scrutiny, I won't deflect. Or I will ask one clarifying question when I'm under pressure. Or I will make my point and stop. I will limit my answer to 2 sentences. Maybe you want to add one more layer that makes this even more effective by choosing one quality you want to bring to the meeting and then tying that quality to a visible behavior. For example, you could choose the quality calm, which means lowering your voice, using fewer words. Or you could bring the quality of being decisive, which means that maybe you make your recommendations and then you give one reason rather than 5 to justify your reasons. Or maybe you want to bring an attitude of curiosity, which means, God forbid, letting other people finish their sentences rather than jumping in. So rather than improvising your way out of imposter feelings, by pre-deciding how you want to show up in a meeting, you'll stop your nervous system from hijacking you into going into fight, flight, or freeze mode. So, you've done your pre-meeting prep, you've decided on your role, you've decided on your contribution, and also you've decided how you're going to respond once you're under pressure. So what to do then when, despite all of that, the imposter feeling still shows up anyway? Because it will. But the first thing I want you to do is to label it silently, obviously. You don't analyze it, you don't judge it, you just simply name it for what it is. Oh, this is that stress response that Chris talks about in his podcast that I'm feeling. Or, wow, nice, this is my nervous system reacting as it should do in a stressful situation. So by giving it a neutral label, you actually detach yourself from the story behind it. You see it for what it is. It's just a feeling. So you no longer treat it like it's a data point about your ability. It's just a physical reaction. The next thing you do is then to move your attention outward. Imposter feelings have a tendency to pull all your focus onto yourself. You start monitoring your voice, your facial expressions, your contribution, or often lack of it, and how you're coming across. Now, when that happens, the trick is to shift your attention back to the meeting itself by asking some simple questions in your head. What are we trying to solve right now? Or what decision are we stuck on? Or what's the real issue here that nobody's talking about? Or why does John keep picking his nose? Questions like this will pull you back into the room and out of your own head. And here's a little reminder. You don't need to be completely sure of yourself about what you're saying before you interject in most meetings. If you're waiting for 100% certainty before you open your mouth, you're more than likely not going to say a word and you're going to leave that meeting seriously annoyed at yourself. Unless you're giving a presentation, as long as you're about 70% confident that what you're saying is helpful and truthful, you're fine. It's often better to have to adjust your views later on in the meeting or even after the meeting than not to say anything at all. And finally, when you're feeling the inner imposter showing up, I want you to think of something called the spotlight effect. This is a mental bias that has us dramatically overestimate how much attention others are paying to our mistakes, our appearance, our behavior. In reality, while you might be sitting there thinking that everyone is wondering what the hell you're doing in that meeting, chances are they are way too preoccupied with what's going on for them to even accuse you of being an imposter. And quite likely they are going through some form of imposter feeling themselves. Now, so far, I talked about what to do before and during a meeting, but in reality, our imposter is usually most active afterwards, when the meeting has already ended. This is when your brain starts to replay all the juicy bits. What you said, what you didn't say. You suddenly remember a few awkward moments, and very quickly the story becomes, oh, I didn't handle that well. They must have noticed that I didn't know what I was talking about. This is still your nervous system that's processing that social threat. But the goal after a meeting isn't necessarily to cheer yourself up, it's to manage that process rather carefully. And you can do that by putting together a very short written debrief. Not in your head, but on paper or on your laptop. And you write 3 lines only. What was the actual outcome of the meeting? What did I do that contributed to that outcome? And what's one thing I'd adjust next time? And then you stop. If you contributed nothing in the meeting, you write that too. No drama. And then use that 3rd line, what's one thing I'd adjust next time, to pick the one sentence you'll say next time and when you'll say it. So, in conclusion, feeling like an imposter in meetings is absolutely, totally normal, and it doesn't mean anything is wrong with you. There's a writer, Arthur C. Brooks, who's written some wonderful books about happiness and human behavior, and he uses this helpful phrase, which is leaning in without giving in. And that means you allow the discomfort to be there without trying to eliminate it, but you also don't let it dictate your behavior. That's exactly the skill you're building here. This is what real self-leadership looks like. It's not the absence of doubt, but it's the fact that you keep showing up despite the doubt, despite the feelings. Good luck, guys. Hey, it's Chris here. If this resonated with you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone else who needs to hear it. And if you want more insights on leadership, confidence, and growth, you can hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. I'll see you soon.